welcome. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. In just a second, we're going to get to the latest on impeachment. Democrats are pushing it today. Today's show is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Your online activity should not be public. Protect yourself at expressvpn.com/Ben. Democrats are now looking at impeachment, of course. So they've proposed a one-article impeachment proposal. They're accusing him of incitement of insurrection. Here is the resolution, the second impeachment resolution, which presumably will be passed today by a Democratic Congress. Resolve that Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and the following article of impeachment be exhibited to the United States Senate. Article of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives of the United States in the name of itself and of the people of the United States. Article 1. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and that the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Further, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits any person who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding any office under the United States. In his conduct while President of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional oath, faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, defend the Constitution in violation of his constitutional duty to take care the laws be faithfully executed, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the United States government in that, on January 6th, pursuant to the 12th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, the VP, House of Representatives, and Senate met at the United States Capitol for a joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. And this is all the impeachment charge the Democrats are bringing against Trump. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state and federal officials. Shortly before the joint session commenced, President Trump, addressing a crowd at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C., there, he reiterated false claims that we won this election and we won it by a landslide. He also willfully made statements that, in context, encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Okay, that is about the vaguest political statement in the world. I mean, like, really. You can find nearly every major American politician talking about fighting for things. Right? It's a staple diet of American politics. Does that mean that Trump wasn't being irresponsible? No. Does that mean that he was actively inciting violence, which is the charge here? It's going to be very, very difficult to prove that. If this ever gets to a Senate trial, which, again, I'm doubtful that it will, considering the timeline here, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to prove that Trump, who said in the speech that people should peacefully protest outside the Capitol building, meant invade the Capitol building, hog-tie the Vice President of the United States, and overthrow the federal government. Right? It's going to be a very difficult stretch for proof in the United States Senate. And so, thus incited by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other objectives, interfere with the joint session's solemn constitutional duty to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, injured and killed law enforcement personnel, menaced members of Congress, the VP, and congressional personnel, and engaged in other violent, deadly, destructive, and seditious acts. President Trump's conduct followed his prior efforts to subvert and obstruct the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. Those prior efforts included a phone call on January 2nd, 2021, during which Trump urged the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, to find enough votes to overturn the Georgia presidential election results and threatened Secretary Raffensperger if he failed to do so. We talked about that call at the time. It was both a bad call and also he didn't have anything he could threaten Raffensperger with. And frankly, it sounds like he was just repeating a bunch of the conspiratorial nonsense about tens of thousands of votes being hidden or fraudulently cast. And he believes his own press when it comes to this sort of stuff. So it wasn't about manufacturing votes. It was about, quote unquote, finding votes Trump believed existed, even though that happens to be not true in the remotest detail. In all this, says the impeachment charge, Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled the co-equal branch of government. And so he should be impeached and removed from office. That is the article of impeachment, which presumably is going to be passed today by the House Democrats. Now, is that going to go anywhere? No, it's not going to go anywhere because the fact of the matter is that in order for the Senate to even come back into session, you have to have an agreement from both Schumer and McConnell to do that. Second, even if it were to come back into session, you then have to have an actual Senate trial. The Senate trial is going to have witnesses. It is going to delve into detail about the attempted insurrection and what was the connection to Trump personally. And by the way, Kevin McCarthy is proposing what I think is probably a better solution to all of this, which is censure. Right? A censure is a congressional censure that basically it's a note chiding whomever it is. Right? The Democrats didn't pass a note of censure against Ilhan Omar, for example, but that's what a censure is. So Kevin McCarthy, who is the House Minority Leader, he put out a letter to his fellow Republicans. He says, having spoken to so many of you, I know we are all taking time to process the events of that day. Please know I share your anger and your pain. Zip ties were found on staff desks in my office. Windows were smashed in. Property was stolen. Those images will never leave us. I thank our men and women in law enforcement who continue to protect us and are working to bring the sick individuals who perpetrated these attacks to justice. In the same breath, I've also heard profound resolve from our conference in the face of this evil. Personally, I continue to believe that an impeachment at this time would have the opposite effect of bringing the country together when we need to get America back on a path toward unity and civility. Notwithstanding the Speaker's push for an impeachment, I've heard from members across our conference who have raised at least 4 potential avenues to the House to ensure that the events of January 6th are rightfully denounced. These include a resolution of censure under the rules of the House, a bipartisan commission to investigate the circumstances surrounding the attack, reforming the Electoral Count Act of 1887 to clarify what the process is, and legislation to promote voter confidence in future federal elections. Okay, that seems to make an awful lot of sense to me. A resolution of censure for Trump's behavior, I think, is perfectly within bounds. I think it is perfectly plausible, and it makes a lot of sense. We'll get to more of this in just 1 second. But first, investors, how about a 10% steady real estate-backed monthly cash flow? Have you thought about the only one true supply-constrained asset, real estate? Intelligent, savvy investors need to check out NRIA. NRIA is one of the nation's top specialists and offers 10% annualized monthly payouts with bonuses targeted to 21%. With NRIA, you can obtain steady 10% return monthly payments with bonuses. You can even use that 401k or IRA to invest. NRIA's 15-year track record and $1.2 billion in new construction development backs you. Invest in this hard asset real estate cash flow fund today for 10% monthly payouts and bonuses. Every smart investor should consider it. Call now 800-700-7540. That is 800-700-7540 or visit NRIA.net. An offer to buy or sell any security is only made by private placement memorandum. Read it first. See us at NRIA.net. Is impeachment the proper solution, especially given the fact that we are not talking about months until he is out of office? We are talking about literally 1 week until he is out of office. I think that is likely not only to not be successful, I think it is likely to carry on beyond the election, which is, of course, what many Democrats are proposing. Jim Clyburn wants this to carry on for months so that this can continue to be used as sort of a cudgel against Republicans more broadly. But bottom line here is that impeachment, if it's urgent enough that it needs to be done right now, then Democrats should have passed this thing like as of last Friday, right? Democrats should have pushed this thing to the floor extremely fast. Instead, they were waiting until Wednesday to vote on it. They wanted to encourage Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. Nancy Pelosi did something that probably is not super constitutional. She encouraged the Joint Chiefs of Staff to basically end around Trump in case of some sort of national crisis, which actually amounts to, legally speaking, an infringement of the executive power, obviously. You know, here's the bottom line. Is impeachment, is some form of censure of the president merited on the basis of what we have seen? Yes, of course. Is impeachment the proper solution with 1 week to go? I don't think that it is. I don't think you can make the legal case that it is. Again, high crimes and misdemeanors requires like a crime or a misdemeanor. Trump ain't going to get charged in a court of law on this stuff. Things can be bad without them being fully criminal. And for those who keep saying, you know, what would happen, you know, we need to stop this sort of thing from happening in the future. Okay, first of all, this sort of thing happening in the future, I can guarantee you we're never going to have giant riots at the Capitol building again. That's not going to happen again. Two, Trump has been defeated. He is leaving, right? We have a week to go. So if you actually want unity at this point, here's what we should do. We should look at the country as a whole, and we should recognize that our fellow citizens are generally not in favor of rioting at the Capitol or threatening the Vice President of the United States. We should recognize that this difficult moment is a difficult moment, that we have some soul searching to do as a country, but not because all of our fellow citizens are racist or white supremacists or bigots who are awful people. The soul searching we have to do is, what are the principles that we wish to hold in common? And I think that does require some soul searching on the right about the willingness to confront confirmation bias, about the willingness to accept facts as they are presented. And I think that after that is done, and I think there is an order to this, I think the right has to lead the way, because obviously what we saw was an element of the right doing this. But I think that the left has some soul searching to do of its own. What is not going to work here is unilateral soul searching on one side and triumphalism on the other. That is not geared toward healing the country in any serious way. We'll get to more of this in just 1 second. First, if you do take up a new hobby this year, it's even better when you have amazing audio that will make the experience even better. Like, for example, I've been attempting to learn Spanish. I've been using my wireless earbuds from Raycon to do just that. Whether it's following directions in the kitchen, binging an audiobook while learning to knit, powering through that new workout with a pumped-up playlist in your ear, a pair of Raycons can make any activity easier and a better time. Raycon makes great sound accessible to everyone. Their wireless earbuds start at half the price of other premium audio brands. And guess what? If you think having those white stems dangling out of your ears looks silly, then that's something you don't have to worry about with Raycons. They come in a range of stylish colors, but always with a comfortable in-ear fit for a more discreet look. You can also personalize it for your ear. They don't just look great. Raycons perform wherever you take them. 6 hours of playtime, water and sweat resistant construction, Bluetooth that pairs quickly and seamlessly. You've heard me say all of it before. If you still don't have a pair of Raycons, you gotta wonder why. Raycon is offering 15% off all their products for my listeners, and here's what you gotta do to get it. Go to buyraycon.com/Ben. That's it. You get 15% off your entire Raycon order. Feel free to grab a pair and a spare. That's 15% off at buyraycon.com/Ben, buyraycon.com/Ben. In the context of that, in the context of the search for unity, we're all going to have to recommit ourselves to some first basic principles. Yes, on the right, basic principles of fact-finding and belief in fact and understanding that evidence is necessary for claims. On the left, you're going to have to do the same thing with regard to some of your stuff. You're also going to have to respect the right of people to disagree with you after examining the facts. Because if what this comes down to is just stomp your opponents whenever you have an opportunity to do so, this stuff is going to get a lot worse. It is not going to get better anytime in the near future. Alrighty, coming up, we're going to be joined by Brandon Tatum from TatumReport.com to discuss the view of policing. Suddenly, the left is very friendly with the police. Weird how that has changed. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Joining us on the line is Brandon Tatum. He's founder of TatumReport.com, former Tucson police officer, co-founder of Blexit with the Daily Wire's very own Candace Owens. Brandon, thanks for joining the show. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So let's talk about the narrative that has emerged, one of the many narratives that has emerged from the left side of the aisle after the Capitol riots last week. That narrative, in the immediate aftermath of the riots, is that this just showed the systemic racism of American policing, which I thought to myself, that does not make any sense since a white woman was shot to death on the grounds of the Capitol, since tear gas was deployed. I guess the idea here is that Black Lives Matter's protesters were treated with ultimate cruelty and viciousness by police across the country, while these protesters were treated with wonder and hope because they were white. And that if Black Lives Matter had stormed the Capitol building, then there would have been mass carnage and death. You're a former police officer. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's a complete lie. Obviously, they're going to project and use whatever rhetoric they can to have political power and try to have leverage. And it's sad that some people on our side, kind of gave them a narrative on a silver platter the way they presented it. They walk into, they claim white people walked into the Capitol or bombarded into the Capitol, yet the young lady got shot in the neck. In policing, and maybe the Secret Service have another approach, but in policing, you shoot in center mass. You don't try to shoot to kill anybody, especially somebody who's unarmed and not really presenting themselves as an immediate threat of bodily injury or death. And so that to me is the converse, or that to me is hypocritical to say that. Black people have been burning down entire city blocks, murdering police officers, bludgeoning police officers, and you can continue to name more and more things, billions of dollars worth of damage, and you rarely see any of them being attacked inappropriately, disproportionately in many of these cases. So I think it's a complete lie. Police officers were incredibly lax when it come to Black people in general, and especially if there was a situation where Black people stormed the Capitol.
My colleague, Matt Walsh, made the I think, almost inarguable point that if the woman who had been shot at the Capitol had been Black, and if the protesters had been Black, that there would be murals all over the country about the evils of systemic American racism. As it is, most of the same people who are very anti-police in most circumstances have now declared that the woman who was shot in the neck absolutely deserved it. Now, putting aside the justifiable nature of the shooting or not, that's going to be adjudicated. I think that there is very little question that the way that the media cover these things is incredibly variable. That when a police officer shoots a person who is Black, the person who is Black is almost immediately elevated to public figure status. And if the police shoot somebody who is white, and justifiable, not justifiable, doesn't seem to matter much in these conversations, then it's a non-issue, and we assume that the police officer was correct to do so.
100%, Ben. You hit the money you hit it right on the head. Anytime you see a Black person getting shot, it doesn't matter what they do. I mean, we've seen plenty of cases across America where Black people are pulling guns on police officers. They're putting police officers' lives in danger, shooting them with tasers, and they get shot and they're elevated to gods, not just, famous figures, but they become gods. They get paraded in gold caskets, although they live a life of crime and devastation in their own communities. And I'll add this one. If Black people are killed by police, they become gods. If a Black man is killed by another Black man, it doesn't matter. David Dorn was murdered in cold blood on video, and most of mainstream media wouldn't even mention his name. They won't even give him any kind of credence. The man served his community, served the Black community, and he did a lot of things that was powerful and impactful in his lifetime, but they wouldn't even give him a T-shirt. And so we can see as clear as the noonday sun that this is hypocritical, and nobody cares except probably you and I and a few others. Nobody cares about truth. Nobody cares about Black people. Nobody cares about white people. They are just pushing an agenda to get political leverage so they can use it when they're running for office, or they can use it to impeach the president and cry unity, yet they cause the most division out of any group of people in the country.
So, Brandon, one of the other things that is changing here is, of course, the nature of the narrative surrounding police. So now that a police officer was killed in the line of duty in the middle of these Capitol riots, the narrative has shifted to the left is very, very sympathetic to police in a way they weren't even a week ago. In the midst of this, of course, they were declaring the police systemically racist. Then it turns out a police officer died in the melee. And the idea is that now they are very much in favor of police. Now, some of us are routinely in favor of the police across the board. Some of us think that every officer who is fallen his family should be picked up by the public. I've personally I recommended on today's show, for example, that people check out the GoFundMe for Officer Sicknick, who is the officer who died in the Capitol rioting. But it is something to see the double standard when it comes to the general treatment of police by the media, whether the police are being victimized by right-wing mobs or left-wing mobs.
Well, here's the thing, Ben. You have them saying that if black people were to enter in the Capitol, they would have been treated much differently. That means that the Capitol Police are racist because they decided to treat white people different than they would have treated black people. Yet, when one of the Capitol Police officers lose their lives, they quickly change the scenario and say, oh, these people are heroes, because they're battling two scenarios. They want all the Capitol Police and every police officers to be racist when it fit their narrative, and they want them to be heroes when it make Trump supporters and it make conservatives look bad. These people are not honest. They will never be genuine. I think that it's honorable to support police across the board, those who are following the law, those who are doing what's right. It is reasonable that the Capitol Police have to protect the Capitol. I don't care what anybody says or how anybody feel about the movement and being upset about the election and storming the Capitol. You can support it or not support it, but you have to defend the Capitol. That's a clash that's going to happen regardless of what side you stand on. And I think that we should support police officers in Chicago, just as much as we support Capitol Police, just as much as we support Secret Service for protecting the president and protecting the vice president and so on and so forth. But you can see very clearly that these Democrats have no intention to support police unless it fits a narrative that makes conservatives look bad and make them look good.
This being Brandon Tatum, founder of TatumReport.com, former Tucson police officer, co-founder of Black Set. Brandon, final question for you. One of the things that has been pushed out there a lot is that Republicans are uniquely susceptible to conspiracy theories about the election and about voter fraud and all of the rest of this. And I will say, I think a lot of Republicans bought into some things that were absolutely not true with regard to this election. I will say that the media have simultaneously pressed forward a conspiracy theory about the United States itself that is untrue. It has become Democratic Party talking points. The idea that America is systemically racist, evil, that police across the country are systemically racist and discriminating against black Americans. And this is treated as absolute truth by the media. So I think conspiratorialism is not restricted to one side of the aisle here.
Right, 100%. I mean, people have fouled narrative. They are going to go after what they want to be true. There's conspiracy theories on the right that people just eat up with no evidence, and they love it, and they still believe in it. And there's people on the left that believe this lie of white privilege, of America being racist, that socialism works. I mean, that's just as ridiculous. I mean, they even believe that Joe Biden has a mission to unite the country when he doesn't. First thing comes out of his mouth is race related. Meaning, saying that if black people were storming the Capitol, that things would be different. He don't know that. He have no evidence of that. And to be honest, if you deduce reasoning, black people probably would have been led in the Capitol and hailed as heroes. And also, if they're going to impeach the president with 10 days left in his administration, that's not unity. But people are brainwashed into believing that it is. That's just as much as conspiratorial as people on the right believing in these mysteries of I guess Trump being elevated to God and coming down and reigning in these 4D chess moves. Now, if he end up doing something spectacular, hey, I'll come on and make a video about it and I'll change my tune. But until then, people need to focus on verifiable truth. And if you stick to that, then we can unite on that.
All righty. Appreciate it. That's Brandon Tatum. Check out TatumReport.com. Coming up, we're going to be getting into the attempt to quash free speech on the basis of what happened at the Capitol last week. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. So, good times. The left has basically decided that free speech is passé. Now, they'd already decided this. On January 6th, before the actual riots at the Capitol building, Thomas Edsall, who has a really interesting column usually in the New York Times, he had a piece titled, "Have Trump's Lies Wrecked Free Speech?" A debate has broken out over whether the once sacrosanct constitutional protection of the First Amendment has become a threat to democracy. See, the First Amendment, free speech itself, is now the threat to democracy, which is a problem, guys. Democracy was instituted in order to protect free speech, not the other way around. In any case, Thomas Edsall suggests, in the closing days of his presidency, Donald Trump has demonstrated he can make innumerable false claims and assertions that millions of Republican voters will believe, and more than 150 Republican members of the House and Senate will embrace. The formation of public opinion is out of control because of the way the internet is forming groups and dispersing information freely, says Robert Post, a Yale law professor and former dean. Before the advent of the internet, said Post, people were always crazy, but they couldn't find each other. They couldn't talk and disperse their craziness. Now we are confronting a new phenomenon. We have to think about how we regulate that in a way which is compatible with people's freedom to form public opinion. Trump, says Edsall, has brought into sharp relief the vulnerability of democracy in the midst of a communication upheaval more pervasive in its impact, both destructive and beneficial, than the invention of radio and TV in the 20th century. In making, embracing, and disseminating innumerable false statements, Trump has provoked a debate among legal scholars over whether the once sacrosanct constitutional protection of free speech has itself become a threat to democracy by enabling the widespread and instantaneous transmission of lies in the service of political gain. In the academic legal community, there are two competing schools of thought concerning how to go about restraining the proliferation of flagrant misstatements of fact in political speech. Richard Hasen, at the University of California Irvine Law School, described some of the more radical reform thinking. He says, there's a cadre of scholars, especially younger ones, who believe the First Amendment balance needs to be struck differently in the digital age. The greatest threat is no longer censorship, but deliberate disinformation aimed at destabilizing democratic institutions and civic competence. Hasen argues change is urgent to deal with election pathologies caused by the cheap speech era. But even legal changes, as tame as updating disclosure laws to apply to online political ads, could face new hostility from the Supreme Court. So they are talking about basically restricting free speech. Post says we just have to adapt to the First Amendment. Thomas Massaro, law professor at University of Arizona, says, quote, free speech theorists have lots to be anxious about these days as we grapple with abiding faith in many virtues of free expression while coping with the undeniable reality that it can undermine free expression itself. Massaro said those who believe in the virtues of free speech need to be clear-eyed about the information distortions and gross inequalities and other harms to democratic and other public goods it produces. So our generation is up at bat here. We all need to engage the question, is free speech obsolete, lest it become so through inattention to the gravity of the threats it faces and poses. How exciting. How exciting. So we have experts who are now saying that free speech needs to be basically trashed or restricted because, after all, people might use free speech to do things and say things that aren't true and or do things I don't like. Well, meanwhile, you have articles in Bloomberg arguing for how basically the internet should be used in order to destroy free speech wholesale. Because, I mean, let's be real about this. There are too many people who disagree with us who are able to distribute information, and that needs to stop, and it needs to stop right now. Alex Webb has a piece saying, quote, Facebook has long defended its lackadaisical approach to misinformation by saying that if it imposed stricter conditions, such content would proliferate elsewhere anyway. Far better to monitor conversation itself or something. But pushing false information and incitement to violence to the darker recesses of the web would be better. The reasoning has long seemed disingenuous, not least because of how many people turn to the social media giant. It has 2.5 billion monthly users across its platforms, which include Instagram and WhatsApp. Alongside Alphabet Inc.'s YouTube, these properties represent the greatest agglomeration of eyeballs the world has ever known. Where else can misinformation find such a massive audience? Facebook's banning of Trump alongside a similar decision by Twitter means we might now find out. Ooh, exciting stuff, says this columnist from Bloomberg. The first alternative was Parler, a social media app that boasts of being a bastion of free speech. But free speech came at a cost. Its failure to moderate content organizing the violence at the Capitol last week prompted Amazon to suspend Parler's use of its web hosting services. Whatever happens to Parler, forcing the most outlandish strands of political discourse off the mainstream platforms would be a good thing. To boost user engagement, social media companies tend to reward provocative content with greater exposure while also deploying algorithms that personalize user feeds. That produces engines that incubate and accentuate radicalization, which can have the effect of turning moderates into radicals. Okay, and then he refers back to this garbage New York Times piece that suggested that YouTube radicalizes people, even though the piece itself is about how a person was radicalized and then turned moderate again by YouTube. Facebook is now taking down all mentions of Stop the Steal. Twitter has banned more than 70,000 QAnon accounts. Web users would have to actively seek out COVID-19 or anti-vaccination misinformation rather than it happening organically on their Facebook or YouTube feeds. Such an approach would not, of course, end online radicalization, according to Dipayan Ghosh, author of Terms of Disservice. Indeed, it could even push those already inside the bubble into an even greater frenzy. But it's the right thing to do because it removes extremist views from the mainstream. Okay, so here is the thing. Here is sort of the problem. In theory, this sounds nice, right? In theory, it sounds like, okay, there's somebody who's putting out overt disinformation like QAnon conspiracy theories. We don't need them on our platform. Sounds nice, right? Okay. Here is the big problem. Well, there are two. One is, what happens when people in charge of the tech companies decide that disinformation includes anything the right says? So, to take the most controversial and popular example, let's say that the right says something absolutely and obviously true, which is that biological men are men and biological women are women, and that biological men cannot become women, and that if you call yourself a woman and you're a biological man, that is not, in fact, a claim to objective truth. If you say that, right, that is a perfectly factual statement. If you say that, how long until Facebook or Twitter decide that that is misinformation? Because gender theory, blah, 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 blah. How long? 5 seconds? 10 seconds? They're already talking inside the halls of social media. I know this for a fact. They're already talking inside the halls of social media about banning any content that quote unquote misgenders. So if you say Caitlyn Jenner is a man, which happens to be true, then you could be banned from Facebook or Twitter. Does that sound like that is enriching the world? Or does that sound like that is promoting fact? Or does it sound like it's promoting political opinion? The typical free speech view has held that ridiculous conspiracy theories like QAnon are best faced with sunlight, right? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. But this Bloomberg Opinion article is arguing sunlight is not the best disinfectant. Banning is the best disinfectant. Cleansing is the best disinfectant. Except this brings you to problem number 2. It's not going to cleanse. And people were pushed off of Reddit. They ended up at 4chan or 8chan. They continued to do exactly what they were doing before. Okay, the idea that policing of speech on these platforms is going to somehow improve the quality of American political life has been deliberately undermined by the fact that that is not true. Has America's polarization been decreased by the heavy-handedness of Twitter and Facebook over the last few years? I mean, let's not pretend that Facebook and Twitter do no moderation of content at all. That's not true. They've extremely sophisticated algorithms they use on a repeat basis. Not only that, they deliberately bias those algorithms. We know for a fact here at Daily Wire that Facebook has been using things like their trusted news servers, right? They basically declare that certain news services are trusted. And based on that, they then downgrade or upgrade the amount of traffic that can be received. They did this in the month leading up to in the month after the election. They did this, I believe. And they decided, shock of shocks, that the New York Times and CNN were excellent sources, while Daily Wire, which, by the way, never bought into the idea that evidence had been provided to overturn the election, was downgraded. Because in the end, a ton of this is ideological. The question is not whether a line could be drawn. Theoretically, you could draw some lines as a private company. The question is who's drawing the lines and what the lines are. And the left is cheering on the line drawing because what they would love to do is ban anybody with a mainstream conservative view and lump them all in with QAnon. Says this columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, Alex Webb. He says, the main platforms needn't worry about getting overtaken. For all of Facebook Chief Executive Officer Mark Zuckerberg's assertion that competition in social media is fierce, the advertising giant continues to grow user numbers, revenue, and profit. Parler's peak daily active user count was 3.4 million globally back in November. It had only 1.6 million daily users last week. Rivals will only start to threaten the dominance of Facebook and YouTube if they are able to build sustainable business models, which means securing advertising dollars, which is not straightforward, given that brands are less likely to want to blazon ads alongside troublesome content. Which, of course, is why the left tries to bully everybody into advertising on only left-wing outlets. Pushing more extreme political discourse out of the mainstream would formalize the content bubbles that essentially already exist. It would be a far cry from the 1990s cyber-utopian vision of the internet as a village green or an agora for free and open exchange of ideas, but it would be for the best. Yes, yes. Preventing people from speaking freely to one another is definitely going to be for the best. You can see where all of this is going. The open cheering now for the crackdown on free speech is at hand. And that is, of course, because your political opponents are bad. And this is the thing we know above all. Your political opponents are bad people, according to the left, so long as you happen to be on the left. We'll get to more of this in just 1 second. First, let's talk about the fact that you really cannot trust Silicon Valley with your information. So what are they doing? Very often, they are downgrading content you want to see. They are preventing you from seeing that information, and they are monetizing your data. So they are making money off of you to prevent you from seeing things you would like to see. This is why I recommend using ExpressVPN every time you go online. Big tech companies can use your IP address to match your internet activity to your identity or location. When I use ExpressVPN, search engines and media sites can't see my IP address at all. My identity is masked and anonymized. ExpressVPN has the added benefit of encrypting 100% of your data to keep you safe from people you don't want to have it. ExpressVPN software takes just a minute to set up on your computer or phone. You tap one button, now you're protected. So, if you're like me, you believe that internet data belongs to you, not to giant tech companies who don't like you very much, ExpressVPN would be the answer. Protect your online activity today with the VPN I trust to keep my data safe. Visit expressvpn.com/Ben to claim an exclusive offer for my fans. That's expressvpn.com/Ben for 3 months free. With a 1-year package, visit expressvpn.com/Ben to get started. Okay. Combine the view that free speech should only apply to people who are within the Overton window. It's the idea that everything you don't like is outside the Overton window, and that's how you end up with the sort of fascistic repression the left is seeking in the social media sphere. Paul Krugman is pushing this over at the New York Times. He says this putsch was decades in the making. You see. Here's how it works. If that awful, evil riot happened in Capitol Hill, that's only because for decades Republicans have been pushing for it. Every Republican you know is part of it. Says Paul Krugman. He says, consider the behavior of leading Republicans who aren't usually considered extremists. On Sunday, Senator Rob Portman declared we need to restore confidence in the integrity of our electoral system. Portman isn't stupid. He has to know the only reason so many people doubt the election results is members of his party deliberately fomented that doubt. He's still keeping up the pretense. We need to understand the motives of our homegrown enemies of democracy. In general, political scientists find, not surprisingly, given America's history, that racial antagonism is the best predictor of willingness to countenance political violence. Anecdotally, personal frustrations also seem to drive many extremists. But neither racism nor widespread attraction to conspiracy theories is new in our political life. The big thing that has changed over the past several decades is that one of our major political parties has become willing to tolerate and indeed feed right-wing political paranoia. When the GOP began moving right in the 1970s, its true agenda was mainly economic. But the party needed more than plutocracy to win elections, so it began courting white working class with what amounted to thinly disguised racist appeals. It's not just about race. Since Reagan, the GOP has been closely tied to the hardline Christian right. So what has changed? For a long time, Republican elites imagined they could exploit racism and conspiracy theorizing while remaining focused on the plutocratic agenda. With the rise first of the Tea Party and then of Trump, the cynics found the crazies were actually in control, and they wanted to destroy democracy, not cut tax rates and on capital gains. And Republican elites have accepted their new subservient status. There it is. Everybody's guilty. Every single person. Doesn't matter how much you opposed it. You're a racist. You're a sexist. You're a bigot. We should shut you out of public life. Really well done here, Paul Krugman. This is definitely going to depolarize and de-escalate. Alrighty, coming up, we're going to get to Andrew Cuomo switching his position on COVID and the economy. First, you might be thinking about your own mortality these days. I mean, who isn't? This is why you should go check out Policy Genius. Policy Genius can help you get the life insurance you need. They make it easy for you to compare more than 30 top insurers at once and save over 50% in the process. There's no hassle because their licensed experts work for you, not the insurance companies. Here's how it works. First, head on over to PolicyGenius.com. In minutes, you can work out how much coverage you need and compare quotes from top insurers to find your best price. Policy Genius will compare policies starting at as little as $1 a day. You might even be eligible to skip that in-person medical exam. Once you apply, the Policy Genius team will handle all the paperwork and the red tape. If you hit any speed bumps during the application process, they'll take care of everything for you. That kind of service has earned Policy Genius a 5-star rating across over 1,600 reviews on Trustpilot and Google. So make this the year you finally cross life insurance off your list. Do the thing you need to do. Make sure that your family is taken care of in case, God forbid, something should happen to you. Go to PolicyGenius.com right now. Get started. You could save 50% or more by comparing quotes. Start the new year with one less thing to worry about. Policy Genius. When it comes to insurance, it's nice and extremely important to get it right. So, again, as we see, the attempt by the left to use what could be a unifying moment in order to divide the country is perfectly obvious. It's going to get uglier and uglier. It's going to invade every area of your life because the left has wanted it to. The left has been pushing for this stuff for a long time. Nothing new is under the sun. There's just a new opportunity to exploit a narrative the left has been pushing for a very, very long time. Alrighty, coming up, Andrew Cuomo has now switched his position on COVID. The left has wanted it to. The left has been pushing for this stuff for a long time. Nothing new is under the sun. there's just a new opportunity to exploit a narrative the left has been pushing for a very, very long time. Alrighty, coming up, Andrew Cuomo has now switched his position on COVID. It turns out he would like to make sure that the economy of New York remains open. Oh, wait, wasn't that killing grandma 5 seconds ago? This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. So it's been fun to watch as every single thing Democrats said 6 months ago becomes the opposite 6 months later. So for really almost a year here, the going wisdom on COVID was shutdowns are good, lockdowns are good. And if you oppose shutdowns and lockdowns on the basis that they harm the economy, that people still need to live their lives, that these sort of blanket lockdowns don't actually accomplish what they are seeking to accomplish, then you were labeled a grandma killer. If you're Ron DeSantis in Florida and you suggested that people should be able to go out and they should be able to do their jobs, they should wear masks, socially distance, but that they should generally be responsible and then act like responsible, autonomous citizens, then you're a bad person. Whereas if you're Andrew Cuomo and you said that everybody should be welded into their home for 7 months, well, then this was you just being awesome, right? This was you leading the way. It was American leadership. You ought to win an Emmy Award for that kind of stuff. Sure, you were shipping grandma back into an old age home with COVID, but, you know, overall, you were really standing up for the ability of your citizens to live and live right. And well, now Andrew Cuomo has decided, you know what? We can't wait for the vaccinations. So the vaccinations are now coming. If ever there was a time, like if there is a serious uptick right now, which there is in the country, and the vaccinations are coming, if the idea is that lockdowns simply delay, then now would actually be the time that you would imagine the Democrats would push lockdown, right? Because all you're looking for is delaying this thing for the next few weeks so that everybody can get the shot. And by the way, the distribution systems in many of these states, just garbage. Somehow Israel has distributed to 70% of all people in Israel over the age of 60 vaccine. And they're almost done over in Israel. Meanwhile, we're barely getting started here in the United States. We've only tranched about 10 million first doses into the public sphere. Many of those have gone to essential workers as opposed to people over the age of 65. By the way, only now is the CDC revising its guidance and suggesting, oh yeah, by the way, we should start with everybody over the age of 65. So really, really well done there, CDC. Well, now Andrew Cuomo, giving his State of the State address, he said, you know what? We can't stay closed. You know, the lockdowns are bad. You know what would be really bad is if those lockdowns quash the economy. That would be super, super bad. Oh, welcome to reality, Andrew Cuomo. Weird, since you were suggesting that you were the king of handling COVID. Here he was just reversing himself yesterday.
We simply cannot stay closed until the vaccine hits critical mass. The cost is too high. We will have nothing left to open. We must reopen the economy, but we must do it smartly and safely. Also, we must energize our lagging private sector and rebuild our economic platform, our transportation system, our infrastructure system for the next generation of growth.
Oh, so now it's really important to revitalize the economy. That guy must have seen his tax revenue stats in New York. And he's like, oh, yeah, it turns out shutting down the economy in my state for a year, that was a really, really terrible idea. Pretty amazing, amazing stuff. Now, meanwhile, Joe Biden's new CDC chief is suggesting that she is on top of this stuff and she is going to change everything. She has an editorial over in the New York Times talking about how she's going to fix everything. She says, as the new CDC chief, I will tell you the truth even when the news is bleak. This is Rochelle Walensky. So just a point, I think we all kind of knew that COVID was pretty bad. So I'm not sure exactly what she is referring to. She says, on my first day, I will ask Ann Shuchat, the principal deputy director with 32 years of experience at the CDC, to begin a comprehensive review to ensure that all existing guidance related to COVID-19 is evidence-based and free of politics. Well, that'll be fun, considering that the CDC, until very recently, as in like today, was suggesting that essential workers be tranched alongside the elderly in receipt of COVID vaccines. So I'm looking forward to more transparency as the Biden administration undoubtedly favors certain racial groups above other racial groups in pursuit of science. This is their push. Says Walensky, who's going to be leading Biden CDC. The research and guidance provided by the civil servants at the CDC should continue regardless of what political party is in power. Novel scientific breakthroughs do not follow four-year terms. As I start my new duties, I will tell the president, Congress, and the public what we need to know when we know it, and I will do so even when the news is bleak or when the information may not be what those in the administration want to hear. And here we go. As CDC director, I will work to address inequities that have left African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans hospitalized and dying at disproportionately higher rates from COVID-19 by focusing on the health conditions that are prevalent in communities of color. How? Really, as CDC director, I'm just wondering, how? Because one of the things that we know is that, according to the New York Times, the same New York Times that this person is writing in, according to the New York Times, there's no genetic reason why Black or Hispanic people are dying at a higher rate. Right? The only thing that they can think of is that people are getting infected at a higher rate because they're going to work more often or because they lived in close quarters. By the way, also worth noting, the same condition apparently prevails in Europe. So how is the CDC going to cure that exactly? And the idea is you make the CDC an overtly political tool, of course. The CDC is then in the business of recommending economic policy because of healthcare disparities that actually spring not from race, but spring from the differences between the impoverished and the non-impoverished. Says Walensky, our nation faces untold collateral damage from the pandemic. Life expectancy rates among middle-aged adults had already decreased in recent years. Data will likely show in the past year we've lost more hard-earned ground on immunizing kids, helping people control their blood pressure, and reducing rates of preventable chronic conditions. Rates of substance use, opioid overdoses, depression, and suicide have soared. We're in the middle of a behavioral health crisis that demands intervention. Oh, you mean like all of these state shutdowns have done a lot of those bad things, like many of us warned they were going to? Maybe that'll be the bad news that she presents to Joe Biden, or maybe not. So, exciting stuff from the incoming Biden administration. We'll see you here tomorrow with much more content. You're listening to The Ben Shapiro Show.